Christmas Eve is a strange time to lose your identity. The company's headquarters glowed under golden lights. Wreaths hung neatly from glass doors, and the aroma of cinnamon cookies floated through the air. Employees laughed near the coffee machines, exchanging Secret Santa gifts and planning holidays with their families. I had always considered this night a celebration of hard work, loyalty, and gratitude. For a man in his 40s, Christmas meant more than glitter. It meant legacy. I had spent 12 years helping my wife build this empire, attending every late-night call, every impossible negotiation, every risky expansion. Yet that evening, something fell off. The decorations were cheerful, but the atmosphere trembled with tension I couldn't identify. My wife, dressed in a tailored white suit that glittered under the tree lights, stepped onto the small stage in the center of the lobby. She was always elegant, always in control, always the CEO. But tonight, her smile didn't reach her eyes. Instead of warmth, there was rehearsed aloofness, like she had already decided who mattered and who didn't. The room quieted. Phones were lowered. I felt dozens of eyes shift toward her, waiting for the traditional announcement. Holiday bonuses, recognition speeches, a toast for the coming year. She called my name, not sweetly, not proudly, but sharply, like a subpoena being read aloud. I moved closer, expecting perhaps a public acknowledgement. After all, I had just closed a major deal that secured the company's international branch. Instead, her tone sliced through the festive air like a malfunctioning fire alarm. "Effective immediately," she said without blinking. "Your salary is suspended." A few employees gasped. Others stared into their glasses, pretending they hadn't heard. No one understood what was happening, least of all me. My heart throbbed against my ribs, not from fear, but from humiliation. This wasn't a board meeting. This was an execution, wrapped in Christmas garlands. I managed to speak, voice cracking despite my attempt at composure. Suspended? For what reason? Her smirk widened, as if she had been waiting for that exact question. "You'll get paid the moment you apologize to him." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. She simply pointed toward a man leaning casually against the glass railing. He looked annoyingly comfortable, his hand tucked in his pocket, wearing a confident grin reserved for someone who already owned the final chapter of the story. He was younger than me, dressed in designer clothes I recognized because I used to buy them for her. People began whispering. Some exchanged glances filled with pity, others with curiosity. I felt my throat tighten as comprehension seeped into my bones like frost. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about business. It was personal. My wife, my partner, my confidant, wanted me to apologize to her new boyfriend. He approached slowly, extending a hand, as though we were being introduced like gentlemen at a golf club. "No hard feelings," he said, voice oily and casual. "Just admit you overreacted. Then everything goes back to normal." Normal? My marriage was being dismantled in front of an audience. My professional reputation was being suspended like a damaged ornament on a broken branch. I stared at him, then at her, searching for a sign of hesitation, guilt, anything human. There was none. In that moment, the Christmas tree behind them suddenly felt like a mockery. The ornaments glimmered, reflecting a distorted version of my face. A man who had built a kingdom only to discover was never truly his. My wife didn't look at me as her husband, or even as her colleague. She looked at me as an obstacle. Laughter resumed around us, but not the same kind. It was cautious, polite, distracted, people desperate to move on from my public unraveling. I stood motionless, surrounded by fake snow, blinking lights, and the bitter truth. Christmas wasn't festive anymore. It was the night I learned that betrayal doesn't always arrive in silence. Sometimes it arrives dressed in holiday lights, holding a glass of champagne, announcing your end like a seasonal promotion, while waiting for you to clap. And I didn't clap. Daniel didn't enter my marriage the way intruders usually do. He didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He didn't whisper. He strolled, with confidence, with entitlement, with the kind of arrogance that grows only in men who believe the world owes them something. The first time he appeared, he stood in my driveway, holding a coffee my wife had made for him, pointing at my house as if he were inspecting a property he intended to purchase. I assumed he was a client. After all, holidays often brought unexpected business. But clients don't keep spare keys. Clients don't wave at neighbors like they're already part of the neighborhood. Clients don't wink at your wife while you're standing 2 feet away. Within days, Daniel blurred the lines between guest and resident. He parked his car in my space, leaving mine on the street like I was the outsider. He sat on my couch, elbows spread, while I stood like a visitor waiting for permission to sit. He answered the house phone, called the cleaning lady by her first name, and took deliveries as if every package were addressed to him. My wife never corrected him. She laughed, loud, delighted laughter, at every comment he made, even when he recycled jokes I had used for years. Hearing my own humor coming from another man's mouth felt like a robbery of identity itself. He borrowed things without asking. First my screwdriver, then my drill, then the set of antique wrenches my late father left me. When I confronted him, he shrugged, saying, "Relax, man. We're family now." Family. He said it like he had earned the title. I stood there, numb, realizing that somewhere along the way, I had been silently evicted from my own narrative. At work, the invasion grew grotesque. Employees who once respected me began deferring to Daniel, as if he were the successor to my role. He walked through the office with my wife at his side, whispering ideas into her ear, ideas I recognized as strategies I had crafted during sleepless nights. She quoted him in meetings, attributing to him suggestions I had made long before his arrival. When I spoke up, she dismissed me, accusing me of jealousy, an accusation delivered with the elegance of a dagger. I started noticing smaller humiliations. My favorite mug missing from the kitchen, replaced with one engraved with his initials. My ergonomic chair suddenly relocated to his temporary desk. My shirts gone from the closet, later appearing freshly ironed on him. He strutted around wearing them like trophies. Even the dog, who once waited eagerly at the door for me, now wagged his tail for Daniel first. Betrayal comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes with a wagging tail and an unfamiliar scent. The worst moment didn't happen in the office or living room. It happened in my own bedroom. One evening, I pushed open the door to find him sitting comfortably on my side of the bed, scrolling through his phone. His shoes were on the carpet my wife and I picked together. His jacket was draped over the chair where I used to place mine after long days. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He simply looked at me and asked, with a smirk that stretched like a boundary he was proud to cross, "So, have you learned your place yet?" The sentence wasn't a question. It was a coronation. In that instant, I understood something no marriage counselor, no friend, no prayer could soften. Daniel wasn't trying to replace me. He already believed he had. He wasn't a rival. Rivals compete. He was a conqueror, and my wife had handed him the map. I had built a home. He was turning it into his kingdom. And somehow, impossibly, I was becoming the guest. The dining room was a battlefield disguised as elegance. A long table stretched across the room, candles flickering atop silver holders, plates arranged like military formations. I searched for my seat and found it. At the very end of the table, a smaller chair, lower, with a plain plate lacking the elaborate patterns glowing beneath everyone else's servings. My knife and fork were mismatched. My glass had no stem. It felt less like an error and more like a statement. Across from me sat Daniel, leaning comfortably in a large chair beside my father-in-law, discussing investments and expansion strategies I had proposed months earlier, plans my wife once dismissed. Now, coming from Daniel's mouth, they were brilliant. My father-in-law nodded vigorously, as though Daniel had resurrected wisdom from the ashes of my incompetence. Dinner began with a toast. My mother-in-law lifted her glass and declared, "To Daniel, whose presence brings new vision and energy into this family." The clinking of glasses echoed like nails sealing a coffin. I didn't raise mine. No one cared. Throughout the meal, Daniel dominated every conversation. He spoke about market trends, leadership strategies, and helping my wife grow. He said it casually, confidently, like someone announcing plans for the property he intended to inherit. My wife hung on his every word, laughing too loudly, touching his arm too often, glancing at me only when she wanted to confirm my silence. Then came the question that stripped away whatever dignity I had left. "So," my father-in-law asked, pointing his fork at me, "are you still causing problems at work? Or have you accepted your new place?" Laughter erupted, not cruel, but dismissive, the kind that pretends to be harmless while carving into your soul. My throat tightened. I realized no one here was shocked by the scandal. No one was conflicted. They had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. What stung wasn't the comparison. It was the clarity. Daniel wasn't replacing me. He had already been appointed. My presence was tolerated only long enough to finalize my disappearance. I wasn't losing my job, my marriage, or my respect. Those were symptoms. What I was truly losing was something far more devastating: my identity. And the most painful part? They celebrated it like a victory toast. There are moments in life when silence screams louder than words. The boardroom was one of those moments. I entered expecting a routine quarterly review, still shaken by the family dinner where I'd been reduced to a ghost. The long mahogany table, once a symbol of decisions I proudly influenced, now felt like an execution platform. Every member of the board was present. Stern expressions, folders neatly arranged, pens aligned like weapons waiting for a signal. My wife sat at the head of the table, her posture impeccable, her face unreadable. Beside her, Daniel reclined casually in an extra chair someone had placed for him, not for a visitor, but for a ruler in waiting. His confidence was infuriatingly effortless. The chair I usually occupied had been moved away from the table's center, as if I were a guest rather than a founding executive. I sat down slowly, scanning the room, waiting for anyone, to smile, nod, acknowledge that I was still a partner, not a defendant. No one did. The silence thickened. My wife cleared her throat. "We have serious concerns," she began. The tone was not marital. It was judicial. She slid a stack of printed papers toward me. Screenshots, social media posts, emails, rumors. Each sheet was a blow, each allegation heavier than the last. According to these documents, I had been undermining leadership, spreading negativity, and sabotaging morale. The claims were detailed, decorated with timestamps and paraphrased comments I had never seen before in my life. My voice cracked, trying to steady itself. "This isn't mine. None of this is mine." A board member leaned forward, nose flared with indignation. "Are you denying the evidence? We have sources." "Sources? Or conspirators?" My eyes darted toward Daniel. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His grin was a silent signature. Behind him, my wife clasped her hands, looking at me with the calm detachment of someone watching an inevitable outcome. For a moment, I wondered if she even remembered the nights we had survived crises together, building this company from piles of debt and hope. Now, she studied me like a defective product she wanted refunded. My attempts at explanation were dismissed with polite contempt. Every statement I made was interrupted, questioned, reframed. "Perhaps you misunderstood the impact of your tone," one board member said. "Leadership requires emotional intelligence," another added, as though reciting lines rehearsed in advance. The room was not searching for truth. They were confirming a verdict. I reached for one of the printed screenshots. It was a message supposedly sent from my account, calling Daniel incompetent and manipulative. A clumsy provocation, exactly the kind I would never write. The board nodded solemnly when I pointed out inconsistencies, grammar errors I wouldn't make, phrases I never used, timestamps during meetings I had attended. They ignored facts. They didn't want clarity. They wanted closure, mine. Daniel whispered something to my wife. She nodded, then turned to the board. "We need stability," she announced. "The company cannot afford internal disruption. For the good of our brand, consequences must be considered." That sentence hit me harder than any accusation. For the good of the brand, the same brand I helped create. Loyalty had been replaced by optics. Truth replaced by convenience. Marriage replaced by alliance. My chest tightened as I realized the trap. They weren't just removing me from the company. They were rewriting history. By framing me as the saboteur, my contributions became irrelevant, my legacy disposable, my presence poisonous. The meeting concluded with an eerie sense of relief. Relief for them, suffocation for me. No vote was held. No defense was requested. My departure was not officially announced. It was already celebrated. People stood, shook Daniel's hand, congratulated him on his insight. He accepted each gesture with the smug serenity of a man stepping into a throne someone else built. As I walked out, the door didn't slam behind me. It sighed. The company I nurtured, the marriage I believed in, the identity I once protected, had been dismantled not through arguments or affairs, but through paperwork and polite applause. This wasn't a boardroom. It was a theater, and I had just learned the painful role assigned to me. The villain in a play written by people who couldn't have built the stage without me. The night after the boardroom ambush, I barely slept. My mind replayed every accusation, every smirk on Daniel's face, every quiet nod from board members who once toasted my sacrifices. My home no longer felt like mine. The office was hostile territory, and even my reflection seemed foreign, someone stripped of dignity and direction. At dawn, as I sat in my car, staring into nothingness, a colleague I barely knew knocked on my window. He leaned in, eyes cautious, voice low, almost trembling. "You're not crazy," he whispered. "You're cornered. Speak to this lawyer before you make any move." He slid a card into my hand. "No firme logo." Just a name, a number, and a faint embossed scale symbol. Desperation makes you either reckless or brave. I've been both enough times to recognize when I needed help. The lawyer's office was nothing like the polished chambers I expected. It was small, almost hidden between a bakery and an abandoned tailor shop. The blinds were half closed, and inside, walls were stacked with case files instead of paintings. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his late 50s, hair graying, suit wrinkled. But his eyes were sharp, dangerous even, like someone who'd spent a lifetime identifying traps others never saw. He didn't offer small talk. He didn't ask how I felt. He simply gestured to the chair and said, "Tell me what they did." I spoke for nearly an hour. Board accusations, HR ambush, Daniel's intrusion, my wife's silence, his salary suspension, the emotional execution disguised as professionalism. He didn't interrupt, didn't sigh, didn't write notes. He listened like someone assembling a puzzle faster than I could describe it. When I finished, he leaned back, tapped his fingers together, and said words that froze my bloodstream. "They're not humiliating you. They're extracting you." He opened a folder he had prepared beforehand, my name on the cover. I hadn't even given him my last name. He pulled out documents I had never seen. Trust agreements, share reallocations, legal drafts with signatures frighteningly similar to mine. My heart pounded so hard I could hear in my ears. "When did you sign this?" he asked. "I didn't." He nodded. "I didn't think so." The room tilted. He slid the papers closer, pointing at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "Your wife transferred your company's shares," he explained, "into a temporary trust under her sole administration. If you apologize, it activates Clause 14, confirming her authority and validating all past decisions. Legally, you'll be admitting fault. The trust becomes permanent. Everything becomes hers." My throat dried. "So if I apologize, I lose everything?" He gave a humorless smile. "Not lose. Surrender. Voluntarily." And Daniel steps in as her legitimized strategic partner. "You will not only be removed, you will be erased." My stomach churned. The HR meeting, the family dinner, the board attack. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography. The lawyer continued, voice slow, deliberate, cutting through denial like a scalpel. "You weren't invited to defend yourself. You were guided toward a confession. They didn't want your apology for emotional satisfaction. They needed it as evidence." For a moment, the air thinned. I had believed I was fighting humiliation. I was fighting extinction. He slid another file across the desk. Emails exchanged between Daniel and my wife, discussing timelines, leverage, and how to corner me emotionally before the legal step. Each message was a nail in my narrative's coffin. "This," he said, "isn't a love affair. It's a hostile takeover disguised as romance." I sat there, stunned, a man watching his life dismantled with corporate precision. Then he added the sentence that stitched my spine back together. Now that you know the game, you get to decide whether you play it or rewrite it. For the first time in weeks, I inhaled deeply, not as a victim, but as someone awakening from anesthesia. I hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Some betrayals arrive like storms, loud, sudden, devastating. Others are drafted, rehearsed, and scheduled like corporate presentations. I didn't understand which one I was living until the night I found Daniel's tablet. It was well past midnight. My home, once a sanctuary, had become enemy territory. I walked through it like a stranger, careful not to disturb the silence, aware that every chair, every picture frame, every scent was now tinted with someone else's presence. Daniel had left earlier that evening in a rush, probably believing his footprint on my life was already permanent. In his haste, he dropped a sleek black tablet between the cushions of the couch, an expensive device with a cracked corner and no lock screen password. Maybe he was careless, or maybe he was confident enough to believe I wouldn't dare touch something of his. That arrogance would become my lifeline. Merry Christmas. Consider this my bonus to the company. My finger hovered for a second, not out of hesitation, but out of acknowledgement. This wasn't revenge. It was truth, delivered with precision. Then I clicked send. In that instant, something shifted. Not outside, not in the world, inside me. I no longer felt hunted. I felt awake, liberated. By mid-morning, the first replies appeared. Short, confused, alarmed. Screenshots of my attachments circulated faster than holiday greetings. Executives who had once smirked at me now sent messages requesting clarification. Some tried calling. I didn't answer. Their panic was not my responsibility. At exactly 10:42 a.m., Daniel's name appeared in my notifications. No smackdown, no sarcasm. Just 3 words. We need to talk. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message, this time from my wife. Short, clipped, unfamiliar. Come to the office. Now, I laughed. For weeks, they treated me like a malfunctioning asset. Now, they summoned me like a fire extinguisher they had forgotten existed. I didn't go. I let the silence sting. Meanwhile, the company's internal communication channels boiled. Legal teams demanded explanations. Shareholders questioned voting legitimacy. Someone leaked a snippet of Daniel admitting his role in accelerating leadership transition. The board, once unified against me, splintered like cracked glass. By lunchtime, Daniel's access badge was deactivated. His car was removed from the executive parking lot, not driven out by him, but loaded onto a tow truck. Employees watched. No one laughed this time. The silent puppeteer had lost his strings. My wife, however, reacted differently. She didn't collapse or lash out. She froze. She walked through hallways she once owned with a stiffness that betrayed her uncertainty. No one approached her. No one congratulated her. Respect doesn't vanish loudly. It evaporates quietly, molecule by molecule, until everyone realizes the room feels cleaner without its source of toxicity. That evening, the board called an emergency meeting without her. For the first time since this ordeal began, my absence wasn't a sentence. It was a statement. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the insecure husband. I wasn't the obstacle. I was the whistleblower. The man who exposed a hostile takeover disguised as marital evolution. My wife, who once believed she could reshape my identity with signatures and schemes, now faced an identity crisis of her own. The CEO whose ambition had mutated into sabotage. As night fell, I opened my laptop again, not to defend myself, but to watch the unraveling of a world that had already decided I didn't belong. Ironically, the same people who tried to erase me had given me the greatest gift of all, a Christmas where I finally stopped apologizing for who I was and started dismantling who they pretended to be. When a kingdom collapses, it rarely begins with explosions. It starts with silence, the kind that hums before a storm. The morning after I released the evidence, the company parking lot was unusually still. No cheerful Merry Christmas, no confident executives rehearsing their greetings, no Daniel leaning against the railing like he owned the air. Whispers traveled faster than emails. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Around 10:15 a.m., the board arrived. not through the main lobby where applause once greeted them, but through a private entrance used only during crises. Their faces were tight, their voices clipped. My wife trailed behind them, shoulders drawn back in a posture she hoped still conveyed leadership. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered with something I had not seen in her before: fear. The board summoned Daniel. His name echoed across the floor like a verdict. He appeared moments later, dressed the way he always did. Expensive, casual, confident posture. A man who believed the world itself was merely a waiting audience. But today was different. His arrogance didn't land. It hovered, unsupported, like a balloon with no string. He approached the group with forced calm, expecting a private conversation, a negotiation, maybe even a promotion masked as a reprimand. Then reality introduced itself. One board member, normally a man who avoided confrontation, stepped forward with a folder in hand. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He read, not accusations, but documented facts. Emails, instructions, memos, comments Daniel once believed would remain digital secrets. Each sentence was a shovel, each paragraph a pile of dirt, burying the persona he had so carefully constructed. Daniel tried speaking, but the board didn't permit interruptions. He had lived as though the rules didn't apply to him. Today, they finally did. My wife stood slightly behind the table, hands clasped, face stiff. She didn't defend him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even blink. The same woman who once introduced Daniel to colleagues as a visionary mind now avoided eye contact like he carried contagion. She had expected me to crumble. Instead, her entire power structure was crumbling around her. When the board concluded, they handed Daniel a document. Not a warning, not a suspension, a resignation form, already typed, dated, and signed by legal counsel. He was given a choice: sign, walk away quietly, and avoid public scandal, or refuse and face immediate legal action for corporate tampering and fraud. The man who once strutted through hallways now stared at the paper like it was an alien language. His confidence drained. His smirk died. His shoulders slumped. In that moment, the throne he believed he had climbed disintegrated beneath him. He signed. Just like that, the man who had moved into my marriage, my home, and my company was reduced to a footnote. A security escort appeared, not hostile, not dramatic, just efficient, like closing a browser tab. He walked him outside. No applausi, no farevel, no simpate. Then came the final twist of humiliation. His car was waiting in the driveway, not for him, but for towing. He wasn't even granted the dignity of driving away from the empire he tried to conquer. The keys weren't handed to him. They were taken. On the balcony above, my wife watched in petrified silence. For weeks, she had orchestrated my downfall with rehearsed confidence. But now her gaze was hollow, her breath uneven, her world shrinking with every step Daniel took toward irrelevance. He didn't turn back. He didn't apologize. He didn't fight. He disappeared. Not like a villain defeated in glory, but like an error corrected. A placeholder deleted. A chapter removed before the book went to print. And as the board walked back inside, whispering about restructuring and leadership review, one truth echoed louder than any accusation. She didn't lose her boyfriend. She lost her shield. Her empire trembled. Not because he left, but because I wasn't the one who fell. Control is a strange possession, fragile, invisible, and intoxicating. For years, my wife clutched it like a crown welded to her ego. She believed leadership was authority, not responsibility, domination, not guidance. But control, when misused, doesn't break suddenly. It unravels. And the first thread was pulled the moment the board escorted Daniel out of the building. The next morning, the board convened without her. For the first time in the company's history, she was not invited to a leadership meeting she herself had scheduled. She paced outside the conference room, heels striking marble tiles like a ticking clock. Employees watched in silence, whispering behind screens, avoiding her gaze. Her once commanding voice, capable of silencing rooms, now trembled every time she demanded to know what was going on. At 11:13 a.m., the door finally opened. The chairman stepped out, holding a folder so thin and yet so devastating it may as well have been a guillotine. He looked at her not with respect, but with a disappointment sharpened by betrayal. "We need explanations," he said. "No greeting, no courtesy, no shield." She tried speaking, weaving sentences filled with buzzwords, strategy jargon, and leadership cliches, phrases she once used to charm investors. But this time, they sounded empty. The board did not. They didn't smile. They didn't believe her narrative anymore. They wanted answers rooted in truth, and she only had excuses woven from ambition. By noon, investors began calling. Screens inside the conference hall flashed with alerts. Emails marked urgent, immediate response required, and investment reassessment. Her tone shifted from commanding to pleading. She assured them everything was under control. But control, once questioned, becomes a ghost. And ghosts don't reassure, they haunt. Hours later, news outlets caught wind of the internal crisis. A reporter released a leaked memo. CEO's spouse exposes internal misconduct and unauthorized power shifts. Headlines multiplied like wildfire. Toxic leadership at the top. Corporate coup backfires. When ambition becomes sabotage, each headline reflected her reflection back at her. Not as a visionary CEO, but as a cautionary tale. Journalists didn't want details. They wanted a story. And she had given them one drenched in scandal, betrayal, and a downfall no PR team could spin. The holiday gala, her annual spectacle of success, was canceled. Decorations came down before they were finished going up. Caterers demanded refunds. Musicians, once eager to perform, withdrew. The ballroom that was supposed to showcase her reign remained dark, echoing like an abandoned throne room. And then came the employees. The same people she once paraded before shareholders as proof of her empire's strength. They didn't revolt. They didn't argue. They simply stopped believing. Loyalty doesn't explode, it evaporates. Conversations in hallways paused when she walked by. People avoided eye contact. Doors didn't close behind her anymore. They stayed open, letting silence follow her like a shadow. The true collapse, however, occurred during a live interview she had scheduled days prior, confident she would announce the company's strategic leap into the future. Instead, the journalist asked the one question she couldn't outrun. "Did you knowingly participate in the removal of your spouse from the company?" The camera zoomed in. She hesitated. Eyes darted. Lips parted, searching for lies that no longer obeyed her. Millions watched not a CEO, but a leader unraveling under the weight of truth. The comments section exploded. "Is this leadership? How do you fire your own husband?" Power doesn't replace character. Her face tightened. Her voice cracked. And in that moment, she wasn't the ice-cold executive who once suspended my salary in front of a Christmas tree. She was a woman trapped inside the empire she tried to build without a conscience. Every headline became a mirror, and mirrors never lie. They don't distort ambition. They don't soften cruelty. They don't erase choices. They simply reveal what power hides. She didn't lose control of the company. She lost control of herself. There's a moment in every war when a soldier realizes the battlefield is no longer worth dying on. Mine arrived not with a scream, a confrontation, or a final blow, but with silence. Calm, unshakable silence. After weeks of accusations, betrayals, and power plays, I expected my ending to be loud. Instead, it felt like a door quietly closing behind me, sealing in a chapter one finally understood was never mine to finish. The company continued crumbling under headlines and investigations, but I no longer cared. The home I once fought to protect now echoed with absence, not loss. And my wife, the woman who once shared dreams with me, had become a stranger whose ambition had devoured the last traces of affection. She had tried to reduce my existence to a signature, an apology, a surrender. Yet the irony was sharp enough to taste. No courtroom could force identity. No CEO title could control peace. One morning, I woke up and realized something astonishing. I wasn't angry anymore. Rage had burned itself out. Humiliation had emptied, and anxiety had lost its grip. What remained wasn't revenge, it was clarity. She had wanted me broken. Instead, she had introduced me to the version of myself I had neglected, a man who no longer needed validation to breathe. I didn't sue her, though the evidence was enough to bury her career and perhaps her freedom. Every lawyer I spoke to encouraged litigation. You can destroy her, they said. You have enough proof to end everything she built. But destruction is merely another form of attachment. To destroy someone, you must remain tied to them. I wanted something she would never comprehend, a future that did not require her shadow to exist. I didn't expose her online either. Social media would have devoured her reputation like vultures picking a carcass clean. People love public tragedy more than justice. But the digital world did not deserve the story of my healing. Some victories are too sacred for an audience. So I chose the quietest revenge imaginable. I left, not dramatically, not emotionally, not with tears or speeches. I packed my belongings, what little was truly mine, and closed the door without announcing it. My key, which once symbolized partnership, lay on the kitchen counter like a relic of an ancient religion. I didn't leave a note. She didn't deserve explanations, and I no longer require acknowledgement. For the first time in years, I walked without waiting for someone to follow. I rented a small apartment overlooking a quiet park where old men played chess and children screamed without permission. I bought new dishes, new sheets, and new coat. Not because I needed replacements, but because I needed items that didn't carry her fingerprints. My first night there, I slept without dreams. Not peacefully. Peace isn't a gift, it's a muscle. But I slept knowing I was no longer in a cage built of manipulation and arrogance. Days turned into weeks. The phone rang less, and eventually, not all. Word reached me that the board had stripped her of her position. Investors abandoned her. She tried rebuilding a narrative, but a house built on the ashes of another collapses on its architect. She looked for someone to blame, someone to drag down with her. She couldn't find me, because I was no longer there. She had tried to crush me with power, believing authority was ownership. She forgot one truth every wise adult eventually learns. Power only matters to those who fear losing it. I no longer feared anything connected to her. And that freedom wasn't a prize, it was a rebirth. She once demanded an apology from me to get my life back. But the greatest apology she never anticipated was this one. I outgrew the version of myself who wanted her. And that was the one sentence she could never sign, never reject, and never reverse. I didn't need her anymore. And in the end, that was the only justice that mattered.